The body was discovered at 5 o'clock in the morning. Duty Warden Peters was making his usual rounds of Oxford Prison's utility rooms when he noticed a thin trickle of blood coming from under the utility room door. He would later say he sensed trouble before he saw it. The stale air of the corridor was filled with the metallic odor of blood, and something else he couldn't describe in words. When Peters pushed the door open, it yielded reluctantly, as if something soft were blocking it from the inside. That something was the body of the prisoner Leonard Cobo. He was lying on his stomach, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes wide open, as if in utter amazement. His prison robe was torn, particularly in the lower part of his body. Blood, a lot of blood, covered the floor of the back room. An hour after the discovery of the corpse, Detective Aziza Nkosi arrived at Oxford Prison. She parked her old Ford in the service parking lot and took a quick glance at the prison building, which with its gray walls and rows of small windows resembled an ancient monster that swallowed people and digested them slowly, without haste. Detective Nkosi? A tall, wiry man in a warden's uniform approached her. Xavier Cross. We spoke on the phone. They shook hands. Cross's palm was as dry and stiff as sandpaper. I understand you have a murder, Aziza said, looking straight into the warden's eyes. She always looked people in the eye, believing that it was the truth that words could not hide. Yes, murder. Inmate Leonard Cobo, 26 years old. 3rd year of a 5-year sentence for armed robbery, Cross said dryly, as if reading from a report. Body was found in the back room around 5 a.m. this morning. Looks like he was beaten to death. There's definite signs of sexual assault. Cameras? No cameras in that hallway. Cross pursed his lips. Budgetary constraints. Aziza mentally noted that fact. Convenient, she thought. Did anyone see or hear anything? No. No one is supposed to be in this part of the prison at night. Only the wardens on duty make rounds once an hour. Peters found the body during his rounds. They entered the prison building. Aziza immediately felt the air grow heavier, filled with the smell of chlorine, sweat, and something else. The smell of despair and boredom that characterizes all the prisons of the world. How did the prisoner end up in the staff quarters at night? She asked, following Cross down the long corridor. That is the main question of the investigation. He threw a quick glance at her over his shoulder. The preliminary theory is an inter-prisoner showdown. We've got several racially mixed factions. Maybe Cobo crossed someone's path, and that someone was able to take him out of his cell, walk him across the prison to the staff quarters, kill him, and walk back in, all without the cells and guards noticing. Cross stopped and turned to her. Detective, I understand your skepticism, but prison, like any closed system, has its own loopholes. Inmates are resourceful, and sometimes the staff can turn a blind eye to certain things. Are you suggesting corruption among your staff? I'm simply stating the fact that the prison system is flawed, he continued walking. I suggest we start by examining the crime scene. The medical examiner's already there. The utility room where the body was found was a small windowless room filled with shelves of cleaning supplies and equipment. The body had already been taken away, but there were still traces of blood on the floor, though they had already begun to be scrubbed away. The medical examiner, a full-figured woman with glasses, was making notes in a notebook. Dr. Ramirez, Cross introduced her. Aziza Nkosi, the detective nodded to the expert. What can you tell me? The death occurred between midnight and 2 a.m., Ramirez said without looking up from her notebook, caused by multiple trauma to the head and torso. Something heavy and blunt was used, possibly a pipe. There are signs of sexual assault, quite brutal. Rectal trauma is extensive. Any traces of DNA? We got samples, but don't get your hopes up. If the assailant used a condom and then cleaned up well, we're not going to find anything. We need to check everyone who had access to this hallway, Aziza told Cross. And I want to talk to the victim's cellmate. His cellmate is Dwayne Essex doing time for drug trafficking. Cross nodded. I'll set up a meeting for you. And I've already prepared a list of the personnel who had access to this wing at night. He handed her a folder. Aziza took a quick look at the list 6 names, including the wardens on duty and the nurse. I want to talk to all of them, she said. Of course. Cross pretended not to notice her demanding tone. I'll arrange it. But first, you might want to take a look at the victim's cell. The cell where Leonard Cobo and Dwayne Essex lived was no different from hundreds of other prison cells. 2 bunks bolted to the floor, a small table, a toilet, and a sink. The only sign of individuality were the books, a dozen or 2 shabby volumes stacked neatly against the wall near one of the bunks. Cobo liked to read, Cross remarked. One of the few prisoners who regularly borrowed books from the prison library. Aziza approached the books, Dostoevsky, Dickens, Baldwin, serious literature. And his cellmate? Essex? Cross grinned. He's more of a comic book guy if he reads it all. At that moment, the cell door opened and the warden entered, accompanied by the prisoner, a tall, muscular man with sharp features and shrewd eyes. Dwayne Essex, the warden introduced him. I am Detective Nkosi, Aziza said. I have some questions about your cellmate. Essex crossed his arms over his chest and leaned against the wall. Go ahead. When was the last time you saw Leonard Cobo? Last night before lights out. We went to bed as usual, and then I woke up and he was gone. And that didn't alarm you? Essex shrugged. Leo often disappeared at night. He had business of his own. What kind of business? How should I know? Essex smirked. I'm not his babysitter, but you must have some idea. Essex was silent for a moment, as if assessing whether to go on. Leo was special, different, read smart books, wrote poetry. It's not easy in prison. Was he abused? No, Essex shook his head. He was appreciated. Certain people. What kind of people? Essex fell silent again, casting a quick glance at Cross. People with power. Could you be more specific? Aziza insisted. I'm sorry, Detective, but I want to live out the rest of my term. Essex straightened up. If I start naming names, I might not make it to breakfast. Aziza realized she wasn't getting anywhere else now. All right, if you remember anything or want to talk, let me know. After talking to Essex, Aziza spent a few more hours talking to the prison staff. Most of them said pretty much the same thing. Cobo was a quiet prisoner, didn't cause trouble, kept apart from the mainstream. No one had seen or heard anything the night of the murder. Last on the list was the senior warden, Richard Greer. When he entered the interrogation room, Aziza immediately noted his trim figure, his military bearing, and his cold, assessing gaze. He was in his 50s, but he retained the physicality and commanding aura of a man accustomed to command. Senior Warden Richard Greer. He sat down across from her. What can I do for you, Detective? Tell me what you know about Leonard Cobo. Greer frowned slightly, as if gathering his thoughts. Cobo, quiet guy, smart, not your typical inmate. Read a lot, wrote a lot, stayed out of the gangs. Did he have any enemies? Everybody has enemies in prison, Detective, especially those who stand out from the crowd. Did he have any friends? Or, a special relationship with anyone? Greer got a little tense. What are you implying? Nothing, Mr. Greer. Just gathering information. The warden leaned back in his chair. I'd say Cobo was a loner. Didn't get too close to anyone except maybe his cellmate. Where were you last night between midnight and 2 o'clock? At home sleeping, Greer answered without hesitation. My shift ended at 8 o'clock at night. I have a wife and 2 grown children who can attest to that. Aziza made a note in her notebook. Who do you think could have killed Cobo? Greer thought for a moment, then shrugged. Like I said, it's easy to make enemies in prison. Maybe he got involved in some kind of interracial dispute, or owed someone a debt, or he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. What about the wardens? Could they have been involved? Greer squinted his eyes. Are you blaming the prison staff? I'm just considering all the possibilities, Aziza replied calmly. After all, someone must have helped the prisoners to get Cobo out of his cell and take him to the staff room. Or he went there himself. As I said, the prison has its loopholes. Some prisoners are skilled at picking locks or bribing others to gain access to restricted areas. Aziza nodded, pretending to accept this explanation. You've been working in this prison for a long time, Mr. Greer. Have you noticed anything unusual in Cobo's behavior lately? Did he seem frightened or agitated? Greer shook his head. Nothing out of the ordinary. He'd always been collected, in control of himself, but in prison, everyone learns to hide their emotions. I understand, Aziza said. Thank you for your time, Mr. Greer. If you remember anything, let me know. When Greer left, Aziza remained seated at her desk, reviewing her notes. Something about this story didn't add up. Inter-prisoner squabbles? Maybe. But then why the level of brutality? And how had the prisoners managed to pull this off undetected? Her musings were interrupted by a knock on the door. Cross came in. "Are you done for the day, detective?" "For now," she answered, gathering her papers into a folder. "But I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll need full access to Kobo's personnel file, as well as records of all his movements around the prison over the last month." Cross pressed his lips together. "That would require a warrant. Prison records are confidential." "Then I'll get a warrant." Aziza stood up. "In the meantime, please don't let anyone into Kobo's cell and keep all his belongings intact." "Of course," Cross smiled strainedly. "We're as interested in solving this case quickly as you are, Detective." "I doubt it," Aziza thought, but said nothing aloud. Stepping out of the prison into the fresh air, she took a deep breath. The day was just beginning, but she already felt that this investigation would be one of the most difficult of her career. Everyone kept secrets within the prison walls, prisoners and wardens alike, and she was sure that Leonard Kobo's death concealed a much darker story than the usual prison feud. Leonard Kobo was born in a dysfunctional Glensdale neighborhood where the gray high-rises resembled concrete wells from which it was nearly impossible to escape. His mother, Layla, worked 2 jobs trying to make ends meet, and his father disappeared before he was born. The school's literature teacher, Mr. Thompson, remembered Leonard as a bright boy with a remarkable aptitude for languages and literature who could have gone far if he had been born elsewhere. But the street pulled Leonard down faster than books could save him. At 16, he was already in a local gang. By 19, he had his first conviction for drug possession, and at 23, he was arrested for armed robbery of a convenience store. He hadn't planned the robbery. He just happened to be with friends, one of whom pulled out a gun. Leonard could have walked away, but he stayed, a decision that cost him 5 years in prison. Aziza was going through Leonard's personnel file in her office. A third glass of coffee was steaming on the desk. A photograph from the file showed a young man with deep, attentive eyes and a barely perceptible half-smile that seemed to say, "I know something you don't." "Who were you, Leonard Kobo?" Aziza whispered, studying the documents. "And why did someone kill you so brutally?" She'd gotten a warrant to access the prison records and was now comparing the official reports with the autopsy results and witness statements. Something didn't add up. According to the official records, Leonard was a model prisoner. Not a single disciplinary action in 3 years. Participation in the prison reading program, even a few commendations from prison officials for helping to organize the library collection. But there were oddities. Aziza noticed that about 6 months ago, regular meetings with the prison psychologist had appeared on Leonard's schedule. However, the psychologist's notes mentioned Kobo only in passing, without elaboration. There were also frequent moves around the prison, mostly to the administration building, with no clear reason given. Well, she muttered, making notes. "Who called you, Leonard?" A phone call interrupted her musings. "Detective Nkosi. This is Dr. Ramirez. I have the toxicology results and additional autopsy findings." "Anything unusual?" "You could say that. First of all, there were traces of alcohol in the victim's blood. Not a critical amount, but enough to raise questions. How does an inmate get alcohol in prison? Anything else?" "Yeah. There's skin under the victim's fingernails, presumably from the attacker. DNA is being analyzed now. And the other odd thing is the bruising on the body varies in age, some over a week old, and the nature of the bruising, specific." "Specific how?" "It looks like handcuff marks or something, on the wrists, ankles." Aziza frowned. "Was he tortured?" "Not necessarily." Ramirez sounded uncertain. "The bruises could also be from, shall we say, rough sexual play." Aziza hesitated. She needed to talk to Dwayne Essex again, in more detail. If anyone knew what was going on with his cellmate, it was him. The next day, she returned to the prison. Cross greeted her with obvious displeasure. "I thought we'd already established the most likely theory, Detective," he said as he led her down the hall. "Interprisoner violence. My men are already interviewing the gang leaders. Any results? Not yet, but it's only a matter of time." "Then you won't mind if I continue my investigation," Aziza said, not asking but stating. "I need to talk to Essex again. Alone." Cross pressed his lips together, but he didn't argue. "Whatever you say, but I think you're wasting your time." Dwayne Essex looked tense as he was led into the interrogation room. Aziza noticed that he kept looking around, as if expecting someone to overhear their conversation. "Dwayne," she began calmly, "I think you know more than you've told me, and I think you're afraid to talk." "I'm not afraid of anything," he snapped, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I can protect you," Aziza continued. "If you tell me what you know, I can arrange a transfer to another prison, with better conditions." Essex grinned. "Detective, you don't understand. It's not that I'm afraid of other prisoners. This is a different level." Aziza leaned closer. "Tell me about Leonard's relationship with the wardens." Dwayne was silent for a long time, then took a deep breath. Leo was special, smart, educated, despite the neighborhood he was from. The superiors had noticed that, especially one of them. "Greer?" Essex flinched at the mention of the name. "Don't make me name names," he said quietly. But yes, the senior warden had noticed him. At first it seemed harmless. Talk about books, extra time in the library. Then the special privileges started. Extra food, cigarettes, sometimes even alcohol. What was Leonard supposed to do in return? "What do you think?" Dwayne grinned bitterly. "Prison is a place where everything has a price. Everything." "Did he tell you that?" "Not directly, but I'm not stupid. I've seen him come back some nights. His condition. Sometimes there were, marks. Bruises? Yeah. On his wrists, neck. Sometimes he limped." Aziza remembered the ME's report on the bruises from different times. "Do you think it was abuse?" Dwayne shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe at first, maybe. But then, I think Leo was okay with it. He was getting protection, privileges, and that's worth a lot in prison." "How long had it been going on?" "About 6 months," Dwayne answered. "After Greer read his poems." "Poems?" "Yeah," Leo wrote. "He wrote well. One day the warden found his notebook during a search, and instead of confiscating it, he read it. That's when it all started." Aziza made a note. She needed to find those poems. "Did anyone else know about this relationship?" "Everyone knew," Dwayne grinned. "Just no one talked about it out loud." "Not even Cross?" "Especially Cross. You think there's anything going on, anything could be going on in prison without him knowing? He'd just turn a blind eye. Greer is his right-hand man. They've been working together for 15 years. Aziza nodded. The picture was becoming clearer. "What happened the night of the murder? You really didn't hear anything?" Dwayne lowered his eyes. "I just rolled over onto my other side and pretended to be asleep when he left. I always do." "And you didn't hear him come back?" "No, because he didn't come back." Dwayne's voice shook. "You know, Leo wasn't such a bad guy. We weren't friends, but he didn't deserve to end up like that." After talking to Dwayne, Aziza decided to take another look at Leonard's cell. More thoroughly this time. Cross reluctantly gave permission, but insisted that one of the wardens accompany her. Fortunately, it wasn't Greer, but a young warder named Parker. Nothing had changed in the cell since her last visit. Leonard's books still stood neatly against the wall. Aziza began flipping through them, looking for any notes or bookmarks. In a shabby copy of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, she found a few underlined phrases. In The Great Gatsby, she found bent page corners. But the real find was Walt Whitman's book of poems, Leaves of Grass, where Aziza found a few leaves written in small handwriting between the pages. They were Leonard's poems. She glanced through them cursorily. Most were about freedom, about the sky behind prison walls, about books as an escape from reality. But one poem in particular caught her attention. It was called The Warden, and contained lines that could be interpreted in 2 ways. "Your hands are shackles, but I don't fear them. I crave them. Your gaze is a sentence, but for me it is a pardon." "Interesting," she murmured, tucking the sheets into her pocket. Parker, standing at the door, was visibly nervous. "How much longer, Detective? My shift's about to end." "Just a couple more minutes," Aziza replied, as she continued to look around the cell. She looked under Leonard's mattress, checked the gaps between the bed and the wall. Nothing. But when she crouched down to look under the bunk, she noticed a small crevice in the concrete floor, near the foot of the bed. There was something glistening there. She pulled a pen out of her pocket and carefully picked up the object. It turned out to be a flash drive. "Interesting," she repeated. "Very interesting. What is it?" Parker tried to see what she'd found. "Nothing much," Aziza lied, hiding the flash drive. "Just a coin." Back in the control room, she inserted the flash drive into the computer. There was only one file on it, a password-protected text document. Aziza tried a few obvious choices, Leonard's name, his date of birth, the name of the prison, to no avail. Then she remembered the poem and tried the word Warden. The file opened. It was Leonard Kobo's diary, the one he had kept for the past 6 months. Aziza began to read. January 12th, he found my poems, thought there would be punishment, but instead he praised them, said I was talented. No one had ever said those words to me. January 20th, he brings me books from the town library. Real books, not the shabby ones from the prison library. He says I deserve better. February 15th. Today was the first time he invited me into his office after lights out. We drank real coffee and talked about Dostoevsky. He is an educated man, though he tries to hide it. The notes became more and more personal. The 10th of March. It happened for the first time. I don't know how to feel about it. On the one hand, it was wrong. On the other, here in prison, the concept of right and wrong is blurred, and I need his protection. March 25th. He's getting more and more demanding, sometimes rude, but he brings me what I ask for, cigarettes, sometimes even whiskey, and most importantly, he promises to help me with my parole. The last entries were disturbing. April 5th. Dwayne's guessing. He doesn't say anything, but I can see it in his gaze. I hope he keeps his mouth shut. April 15th. He's getting obsessed. Says he loves me. It's funny and scary at the same time. The last entry was dated the day before the murder. April 20th, I told him I wanted to stop, that it wasn't right. He didn't take it well, threatened, said without him I'd be destroyed by other inmates. Maybe he's right, but I can't take it anymore. It stopped being a deal and turned into slavery. I'll write a statement to the warden, even if it costs me all my privileges. Aziza closed the file, deep in thought. She had a motive now. Greer was afraid of exposure, but evidence was still lacking. She needed concrete evidence linking Greer to the murder. The next day, she returned to the prison with a formal request to review all the surveillance footage from the night of the murder. Cross met her in his office, visibly irritated. "Detective, we've already checked all the footage. Nothing suspicious." "I'd like to see for myself," Aziza insisted. "It's standard procedure." "In that case, I'll need to be present for the review," Cross said. "Prison records are confidential. They spent several hours in the security room reviewing the tapes. Just as Cross had said, there was nothing suspicious at first glance. The corridor cameras showed the usual nighttime routine, wardens on duty making rounds, most of the prisoners asleep. But Aziza noticed something strange. There was a gap of about 20 minutes in the records, from 1:15 to 1:35 in the morning, just at the time when, according to the expert's version, the murder had taken place. "What's this?" She pointed to the timestamp. "There's a pass here." Cross frowned. "Must be a technical glitch. It happens sometimes." "A very convenient glitch," Aziza observed, "right around the time of the murder." "Are you suggesting it was planned?" Cross was beginning to lose patience. "Detective, I appreciate your thoroughness, but you seem to be looking for conspiracies where there aren't any." "I'm just looking for the truth, Mr. Cross, and it looks like someone's trying very hard to hide it." Aziza noticed that the mention of the omission in the records greatly alarmed Cross. He began to insist on completing the review, citing other duties. This only reinforced her suspicions. "Mr. Cross," she said as they left the security room, "have you known Richard Greer for long?" Cross froze. "We've been working together for about 15 years. He's an excellent employee, a model of professionalism. And you've never noticed anything odd about his relationship with the prisoners? Leonard Kobo in particular?" "What are you implying, Detective?" Cross had a note of steel in his voice. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question." "Then my answer is no. Greer has always been a consummate professional. If you have specific allegations, I'd like to hear them formally, with proof, not innuendo. There will be evidence, Aziza replied calmly. I'm working on it. She headed for the exit, but Cross called out to her. Detective Nkosi, be careful with the accusations. Reputation is all we have in this business. Unfounded suspicions can ruin a career. Aziza turned around. And an unfounded cover-up can ruin not only careers, Mr. Cross, but freedom. Accessory to murder is a serious charge. She saw Cross go pale, but he said nothing. Aziza stepped out into the prison yard, breathing deeply of the fresh air. She felt she was getting closer to the truth, but the evidence was still lacking. Leonard's diary could be questioned in court. The camera footage had a pass. Dwayne's testimony could be challenged as that of an interested party. She needed something else, something irrefutable that would tie Greer to the murder directly. And she knew she didn't have much time. Cross had probably already alerted Greer to her suspicions. It was a race against time, and she couldn't afford to lose. Too much was at stake, not only justice for Leonard Kobo, but also the safety of other prisoners who could become the next victims of a system steeped in corruption and abuse. Aziza sat in her office with the printouts of Leonard Kobo's diary spread out in front of her. She reread the entries over and over again, trying to find additional clues that might lead to irrefutable evidence of Greer's guilt. The diary was candid, but between the lines, Aziza sensed that Leonard didn't trust everything, even those encrypted pages. In addition to the basic entries, there were strange symbols and letters in the margins that at first seemed like random notes. But intuition told Aziza that they weren't just scribbles. Leonard was too methodical to make meaningless notes. "What were you trying to say, Leonard?" she muttered, gazing into the symbols. Aziza decided to consult a cryptography expert from the cybersecurity department. Wilson, a thin man with perpetually disheveled hair, took the printouts and studied them for a long time, muttering something to himself. "This isn't an ordinary cipher," he said at last. "It's more like a system of personal associations. Look, some of the symbols are repeated next to certain themes." He pointed to a strange symbol that looked like an intertwined G and N. "This symbol appears every time we talk about meeting someone important. I think it's an initial." "Greer," Aziza whispered. "Richard Greer." "Maybe," Wilson nodded. "And these numbers look like dates and times. If you match them to the main text, it's like a log of meetings." Aziza carefully compared the coded notes with the official duty roster she'd gotten from the prison. The match was almost perfect. Leonard had recorded his secret meetings with Greer, tying them to his shifts. "There's another detail," Wilson continued. "A new symbol appears in the last few entries, next to references to some kind of evidence. It looks like a camera or a cell phone." "Was he filming their meetings?" Aziza suggested, and her heart beat faster. "Quite possibly, and judging from the context, he'd hidden it somewhere safe." Aziza thought back to the flash drive. Perhaps there was more than just text content on it? She inserted the flash drive into the computer again, and this time ran a search for hidden files. After a few minutes, the program found an encrypted folder. The password proved more difficult. Aziza tried dozens of options until she remembered a line from Leonard's poem. "Your gaze is a sentence, but to me it is a pardon." She typed in the word pardon, and the folder opened. Inside were several video files with dates matching the diary entries. Aziza opened the last one, dated the day before the murder. The video was shot by a hidden camera, probably hidden in Leonard's clothes. It showed the office space, the same one where his body was later found. Greer and Leonard were talking, calmly at first, then increasingly tense. "I can't go on like this, Rick," Leonard was saying. "This has to stop." "You can't just pick up and stop!" Greer's voice sounded threatening. "You know too much, and you know I have nothing to lose." "I have proof," Leonard replied. "The recordings of our meetings, your messages. If anything happens to me, it will all become public." The video showed Greer turning pale, then his face contorted with rage. "Are you threatening me, kid? Don't forget where you are. This is my territory. This is where I decide who lives and who dies." The video cut off at that phrase. Aziza leaned back in her chair, feeling a chill run down her spine. It was almost a confession, but it might not be enough for a trial. Greer could argue it was just a figure of speech. She needed more than that. She decided to have another talk with Dwayne Essex, but now she had trumps up her sleeve. She knew more about his role in this story than he'd realized. As Dwayne was led into the interrogation room, Aziza noticed that he looked even more nervous than last time. "Dwayne," she began without preamble, "I know you blackmailed Leonard and Greer." Essex flinched. "What? I didn't—" "Don't deny it," Aziza interrupted him. "It's in Leonard's diary. He writes that you found out about their relationship and started demanding privileges for yourself. Cigarettes, alcohol, the telephone." Dwayne lowered his head. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said quietly. "I just wanted to make it easier to be here. You have no idea how hard it is to be in this hole day after day, year after year." "Tell me about the night of the murder," Aziza demanded. "The truth this time." Dwayne took a deep breath. Leo had gotten a note from Greer. He was supposed to meet him in that back room at 1 o'clock in the morning. He didn't want to go, told me he was going to put an end to it. That he had evidence against Greer and that he wasn't going to be his plaything. "Did he show you this evidence?" "No, but I knew he had it. He filmed their meetings on a cell phone I got him." "And then?" "Then he left." Dwayne lowered his eyes. "I heard the cell door open. One of the wardens, the one who always turned a blind eye to their meetings. I pretended to be asleep. In the morning, I found out Leo was dead." "You think Greer killed him?" "Who else?" Dwayne looked up at her. Leo had threatened to ruin his life. For a man like Greer, control was everything. He couldn't let Leo get away with the evidence. "But you didn't see or hear the murder itself?" "No," Dwayne admitted. "But I know Greer was the last person to see him alive, and he had a motive." Aziza nodded. It all fit, but she needed more concrete evidence linking Greer to the crime scene at the time of the murder to make an arrest. She decided to check the camera footage again, looking especially closely at the time before and after the skip. And then she noticed a detail she'd missed earlier. One of the cameras filming the outer perimeter of the prison showed a silhouette of a man who looked like Greer coming out of the service entrance at 1 hour and 27 minutes past the time he was wearing civilian clothes, not a uniform, and holding some kind of package. Aziza quickly checked the duty roster. Greer wasn't supposed to be in the prison at this time. His shift ended at 8 p.m., just as he'd claimed in the interrogation. With this new evidence, she decided to confront Greer directly. She knew it was risky. If he really was the killer, he might try to hide the evidence or even escape. But she also realized that procrastination could lead to a loss of evidence. Aziza called Cross and demanded that he arrange a meeting with Greer at the prison as soon as possible. The warden sounded annoyed, but agreed. "Greer will be in my office in an hour," he said. "But I'm warning you, detective, if you don't have concrete evidence, it could be considered harassment." "I have enough evidence to ask some very specific questions," Aziza replied firmly, "and I prefer to do it in a formal setting." Greer was waiting for her in Cross's office, sitting with a straight back and a tense expression on his face. Aziza noticed that he looked tired with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Greer," she began, pulling out the evidence folder, "I have new questions about the murder of Leonard Cobo. I've already told you everything," he replied in a steady voice. But Aziza noticed his fingers tapping nervously on his knee. "Not everything." She placed a printout of the camera footage on the table, showing a silhouette that looked like Greer. "That's you leaving the prison through the service entrance at 1 o'clock 27 minutes into the night of the murder. Even though you weren't scheduled to be at work." Greer leaned over to examine the photo. "It could be anyone," he said after a pause. "The quality is too low." "We have programs to improve the quality," Aziza bluffed, "and experts who can identify a person's gait and build." She noticed Greer swallow nervously. "In addition," she continued, laying out her next trump card, "we have Leonard Cobo's diary, where he details your relationship." She laid several pages in front of him. "And this video, taken the day before the murder, where you threaten him." She turned the laptop screen toward him and turned on the video. Greer stared at the screen, unmoving, his face gradually paling. "It's not," he began, but stopped talking when he heard his own voice uttering threats. And finally, Aziza laid out her final trump card, The DNA results. The skin under Leonard's fingernails matches your profile. It was another bluff. The forensic results hadn't come back yet, but Aziza could see Greer was on edge. One hard push and he'd break. "I can explain," he said finally, his voice sounding hoarse. "It was a misunderstanding." "Cruel murder is hardly a misunderstanding, Mr. Greer," Aziza replied coldly. "I didn't mean to kill him!" Greer suddenly cried out, jumping up from his chair. "He threatened me! Threatened to destroy my life, my family, my career!" Cross burst into the office, having heard the shouting. "Rick, don't say a word," he ordered. "Don't say a word without a lawyer." But Greer was unstoppable. The words poured out of him like a dam bursting. "You don't understand." It started so innocently. His poems, they were beautiful. I just wanted to help him, to support his talent. And then things got out of control. I fell in love. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, I felt something real. Greer sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. And he wanted to end it all. Said he was using me, that he'd recorded our meetings, that he had proof, that he'd file a report and destroy me. "So you decided to kill him," Aziza summarized. "I just wanted to talk." Greer looked up at her with inflamed eyes. To convince him not to do it. But he was so cold. Said he'd never felt anything but disgust for me. That I was just a means to gain privilege. Greer fell silent, his whole body shaking. And that's when I lost control. I grabbed the pipe that was lying nearby and He couldn't finish the sentence. "You beat him to death," Aziza finished for him. "And then you tried to fake a sexual assault to misdirect the investigation." Greer nodded silently, tears streaming down his face. "Richard Greer," Aziza said in an official tone, pulling out the handcuffs. "You are under arrest for the murder of Leonard Cobo. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Cross stood back, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know he was capable of murder." "But you knew about their relationship," Aziza said, snapping the handcuffs on Greer's wrists, "and you turned a blind eye to it." Cross didn't answer, but his silence was more eloquent than any words. As Aziza led Greer out of the office, a small crowd of wardens and administrative staff had gathered in the hallway. They watched in disbelief and shock as their colleague, a man they had known for years, walked in handcuffs, broken and aged a dozen years. Dwayne Essex watched the scene from his cell window. As Aziza walked by with the arrested Greer, their gazes met. Dwayne nodded slightly. His face remained impassive, but something akin to satisfaction flashed in his eyes. Several police cars and a prisoner transport van were waiting for Aziza at the prison exit. She handed Greer over to the officers and walked to her car. After getting behind the wheel, she just sat for a while, looking at the gray walls of the prison. This was a complicated case, and she knew it wasn't over yet. There was going to be a trial where all the ugly details would come out. Oxford Prison's reputation would be ruined, Cross's career probably ruined too. But justice had been served, and that was what mattered. Aziza remembered Leonard's poems, lines about the sky beyond the prison walls, about the freedom he never got. Maybe, in a way, by solving this crime, she had given him another freedom, freedom from oblivion, from having his death simply written off as a prison squabble. She started the car and drove out of the prison parking lot. Reports, paperwork, trial preparations were ahead of her. But now, in this moment, she felt the satisfaction that comes when duty is done, when a tangled knot is untangled, when the truth, however bitter, has finally come to light. Greer had confessed to the murder of Leonard Cobo. Now he was to spend the rest of his life behind the same bars behind which he had once been warden. In a strange irony of fate, the man who had power over the prisoners became one of them, a victim of his own dark passions and uncontrollable rage. Oxford Prison was slowly disappearing in the rearview mirror. Aziza turned on the radio, trying to drown out thoughts of the dark back room, the tattered clothes, the bruised wrists of a young man who just wanted to write poetry, and one day, in search of protection and privilege, made the fatal mistake of getting involved with a man for whom control was more important than love. The day was drawing towards evening. The sun was sinking below the horizon. Another case was closed, another crime solved. But Aziza knew that images of this investigation would haunt her nightmares for a long time to come. As they always did, as with all cases that passed through her hands. That was the price of justice, the need to face the human darkness without turning away or backing down. And she was willing to pay that price again and again, day after day, investigation after investigation.